welcome you back to Voices of Truth. And again, in this particular segment, we're continuing our discussion with Prince Yadiel, Nasik Yadiel, who served for decades as our Minister of Divine Agriculture. And he's fondly known now as the Prince of Divine Agriculture and serving on the Holy Council for the community at the highest level of leadership in the community. Uh, Nasik, I want to, on a personal note, I want to go back to an episode. People who don't know, your name Yadiel means hand of Yah,
Correct.
hand of God,
Mm-hmm.
and people would think possibly that you got that name because of the fact that you lost your hand, your limb.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're real personal. We have a history. We're close knit in the community. I was sitting on the steps. You and I were on the steps outside of my house the night before the accident,
Mm-hmm.
and you were on security.
Mm-hmm.
You were pulling the late night shift, and we were sitting there talking, and you were tired. I knew you were tired. And the next day was when you had the unfortunate situation. Um, Can you go back to that particular event? Because in our view, and as part of the history that we are as a community, it is one of the great sacrifices that has been made and we are called upon to make. And you, those of us who witnessed it, who witnessed your trend, your experiencing that, you never missed a beat. You know the story of your going to the hospital with Imatikva is legendary.
Mm-hmm.
Your what you endured, um, and saints need to know that. Brothers and sisters need to know that. But again, your name, you had that name prior to that
Right.
particular incident. But I just wanted to ask you to speak to us a little bit about that particular episode in your life.
Certainly. It was actually a stepping stone, a turning point, for me in my ascension in life, life ascension. I refer to it as an incident as opposed to an accident, but it happened. In fact, it happened during the season of the holy days. It's in the month of the ninth month, and I think that was the season of memorial growing up to Trua.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I can only say, right, that as I go back to question the cause of the incident, was I tired? Was I distracted? Um, because
You were a machinist working on a drill press.
right. I was actually working with a electromagnetic drill, which is almost half my size. I'm not that tall, but still, it's a mighty big drill.
Right.
And I was working in what they call Mazagi root, which is steel fabrication, fabricating steel components for erecting steel structures like warehouses and that nature. And I was working with this huge drill, and my glove became snagged in the bit, and consequently, I lost my whole left hand and a third of my arm, not just my hand, but a third of my arm.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a harrowing experience, of course. I think one of the things that kept me alive was the fact that I had some meager understanding about when incidents happen of that magnitude, that you always must maintain composure,
Mm-hmm.
because once you lose your control and go into shock, then of course many other complications can happen, including the loss of life. So that was a particular point in my mind that kind of kept me focused and kept me conscious.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, moving the story on, it was definitely a challenge for me. All right, even the fact of having to go to the Morgan David here in Demona, and nothing that they could do.
There was the emergency service.
Right.
There's no hospital
There's
in
no
Demona.
hospital in Demona, right? The only thing that
Even to this day.
even to this day,
Right.
only thing they could do was put a tourniquet on the arm and offer me a morphine shot, which at first I refused because I had refused doctors when I was age of 20.
Right.
All right. So I had never taken any medications, any shots since that time.
Right.
But understanding the magnitude of what was happening, I said, okay, I better take this.
Right.
And then put me in a ambulance with my Tikva, another brother at the time, uh, and we rode to Beersheba. And having arrived in Beersheba, thinking that it would be the place where they would attend to the situation, I found myself in the waiting room by myself. Now this was 1984, and waiting with this tourniquet, and I happened to look over and on the table, and I saw what was a glove with a hand in it. I said, "Oh, that's me over there." After waiting what seemed about eternal hours, they finally came in and said, "Well, there's no one here that can attend to the type of surgery you need, so you need to go and push to Tel Shomer Hospital, which is in the Tel Aviv area."
Right.
Now this is
It's another 2 hours.
Another 2 hour drive on the ambulance, riding the shoulders of the highways.
Right.
And again, with the tourniquet. And we finally arrived in Shomer, Tel Shomer Hospital at sundown. This was like 6 hours later. And put into the emergency room with all the vital signs. And several doctors came in, and Imatifa was there. And they were looking, they were discussing, and then they turned to me and said in a very adamant voice, "You have to make a decision." So I'm trying to figure out, what decision are you talking about,
Right.
He said, well, based on the degree of damage to the tissues and the bones, it's very unlikely that if we were able to surgically put your hand back, that it would be non-functional, and you lost a lot of flesh between that. So I looked at Imatifa. She kind of looked at me. At that time, no telephones, no phones,
Right.
no way to
No
call
self,
Ministry of Divine Health, get some type of understanding or counsel. And when I thought about it, the only thing I think about, if it's not going to be functional, right, and there's so much that's lost, then what it's going to look like. I said, well, I'd rather just take the amputee. And that's what was given. So it was total amputation. Thing about it, I had a very, I know again it was Yah that gave me a doctor whose name was Rofe Azaria, the help of Yah.
Help of Yah.
Right, and he did a very miraculous job as a surgeon after 3 surgeries, 3 months in the hospital, and he left me what he said, something that you could work with. And it turned out to be a very practical decision that he made. So having understood that my name, Yadiel, means the hand of Yah, right, then it didn't literally mean that physical hands of Yah. It really meant that the ability to perform, right, the ability to perform according to the redemptive and restorative activities that I had to be involved with. And that given the empowerment, to be empowered with the name, the hand of Yah, meant that with the outstretched hand that I could accomplish what I put my hand to, what I put my mind to, that there was no fear of failing. It was always the ability to achieve what Yah has placed his hands to do.
And when I say you've never missed a beat, Prince Yadiel, you'll see him riding a bicycle. You will see him in the gardens with the tools and the implements. Right. You will see him playing basketball.
Absolutely.
So and hasn't missed a beat.
It's good because I really didn't want to feed into being called handicapped, because that was definitely what was the regimen that was set up in those types of situations. Tel Shomer Hospital department was where soldiers and people in serious accidents, amputees, and so there was always the trauma component where they would assign a psychologist to you and to kind of guide you through your trauma, but they would always stage you as being that you would never be able to do this, you would never be able to do that, you would have limitations on this, and I understood, but I didn't accept the fact that I was going to be handicapped, and I told the psychologist at that point that I really don't need to have any more sessions, and I didn't, and the second point, I didn't want to even project to my family or to my saints that I had to be cared for, that I was unable to attend to my own personal needs, dressing myself, putting a kippah on, tying shoes, So somebody would have to put my shoes on and tie my shoestrings the rest of my life. I couldn't play that out. And so I was just empowered at that time to say, okay, whatever I have to do, however long it takes, right? I wanted to project the fact that uh, we can do this. And whatever the challenges are in our life, they just be stepping stones for our growth and development. And that's how I looked at it. And I think, and I know it was a great lesson for me because that was the foundation for me to move further and further into the journey that Yah has directed me. And it was a great stepping stone. It was a physical challenge that cultivated me into another spiritual understanding.
And it's been a lesson for all of us. And how did it then usher you in? How did it connect with your role in divine agriculture?
It gave me focus because at that point, I knew there were certain limitations in terms of what I could do as on the mechanical side of things, But I still had a mind, and I still had the ability to do certain things, even with a so-called limited function on one side. And I still had the love of the gardening. All right, I was still inspired by the elders to do that. And this was the opportunity to actually just redirect and refocus on that aspect of the journey and to get really involved. So I began to study um, organic agriculture, organic farming, and even began to study the science of agriculture as it's taught in agricultural schools because I wanted to learn the language. The language was important. And from that, we have to say that myself, along with two other members of the community at the time, we became the first black, right, organic certified growers in the state of Israel in 1992. You know, and I think it's important at this point to raise the question when we say divine organic agriculture versus organic. Is there a difference? And definitely there is a difference.
You earlier used terminology such as ascended rather than descended. You used the term, I think you said rise in love,
right?
Not falling in love, right, etc. So language is very important. So please.
Right. Language is important. It frames our reality. It frames our worldview. And the use of language in Hebrew, the word is hagdara. The hagdir means to define, but it also means to fence in,
right?
Or to fence out.
Right.
So language gives us a framework for building our worldview, and the use of language can lead us into or out of, right, certain frames of mind. So when we say divine in community, the question is, what do we mean by divine? And the simple explanation or definition that we give means that which is pleasing unto Yah.
Right.
So the next question behind that is, what is pleasing unto Yah? And we simply define that as to be in harmony with, obedient to the relative laws that govern the holy creations, right? And all aspects of that, which means that we have divine economics, we have divine sports and recreation, all right, because we want to govern these institutions, or our way of life is governed with relative laws that keep us in harmony with the creations. Right. So when we look at divine agriculture, we're talking about an agriculture, right? The methodologies of that agriculture are relative laws that govern the correct cultivation of the soil. So you have words like natural, you have words like organic. All these are concepts, right, that relate to divine. That is, you're not abusing the soil through agrochemicals, right? You're not abusing the soil through pesticides. Even though they're on plants, they still go into the soil. But you're using methodologies that are in harmony with the holy creations. And for any methodology that's used in agrochemical farming, right, there's a natural, divine, organic approach to it. So divine organic agriculture, again, when we look at organic agriculture today, there are many things or practices in so-called organic agriculture that are not allowed in divine organic agriculture. For instance, the use of blood meal. Blood meal is the dehydrated, dried blood of animals that have been slaughtered in the slaughterhouses. And they take the blood, literally take the blood, dry it, and package it as an organic fertilizer. You might ask the question, why blood? Because the essence of blood is protein. So they use it as a nitrogen fertilizer. Okay, protein is nitrogen. So blood becomes the organic nitrogen fertilizer for organic farmers, and they use it on their fields. But it's asur, it's not, it's forbidden for the divine agriculturists to use blood because blood is the life of the flesh, and blood carries everything in the flesh. So whatever that animal is eating is in that blood. Okay, so
whatever pathogens and disease is in that animal is in that blood,
and it goes into the soil.
Wow.
And then the plants pick it up and the people eat it. So then the other part is bone meal. Bone meal is the crushed bones of, again, animals that have been slaughtered. They steam them, right? They crush them, they dry them, and they use them as a organic fertilizer. So bone is calcium. So now you have a calcium, so-called calcium organic fertilizer. This comes under the guise of organic agriculture. So we have to make a distinction between the holy and the profane. All right. So we have divine organic agriculture as opposed to organic agriculture or natural farming, because we have to make that difference.
That's a critical difference.
Absolutely.
That's a critical difference. Of course, this whole idea of the language, it stems from one of Ben-Ami's earliest and most profound concepts that have framed our way of life, and that's the power to define, seizing the power to define. That it's important, the words that we attach and the language that we use in our midst and what have you. And I'm learning about, I didn't know about the organic, the two areas, but I see the critical importance of that. Where in your involvement in Ghana, for example, in recent years, you've been deeply involved in projects there that are rooted in the expanding this idea of divine organic agriculture. And of course, it is in the Edenic lands where we're confronted literally with the Monsanto geniuses, the evil geniuses of Monsanto and other chemical giants. And of course, they come with the traditional good and evil, and say, well, this will expand your output and will give you a better crop and greater yields, etc. Their language that they like to use, and it sounds good. It's intriguing, and it will boost your productivity and your profits, etc. What has been what is the reality in what they are saying, and then how do you confront it? What are the challenges that you then have to overcome on the ground in Ghana, in Kenya, and other places that we've been? I remember when you jumped on a tractor in KwaZulu Natal in South Africa and began to operate the tractor, and everybody was in awe, but this is where we meet, these evil agendas and evil minds. And so what is the challenge, and how do you surmount them? How do we surmount them?
Okay. Monsanto is the present degenerative cycle of agrochemical farming, which started after World War II, 1945. All right. During World War II, right, companies like IG Faber and other so-called giants out of Europe, right?
Nazi Germany.
Their scientists were involved with making weapons, biological weapons, right, during that war to use against the troops. And at the close of World War II, there was a stockpile of raw materials that were used to make the poison gases, right, and the bombs. And these stockpiles of materials that were used, they identified them as being possible uses for agriculture. And so what they actually did is they actually took the poison gas elements and they converted them into pesticides to control insects. DDT was one of them, all right, and other insecticides that were used to attack the nervous systems of insects, which were the nervine gases that were used in World War II, and of course World War I, the mustard gas. So we find that the same chemical formulas that were used in biological weapons are the same chemical formulas that they used at the end of World War II to develop the agrochemical attack against the land through pesticides, chemical pesticides, and artificial fertilizers, which were ammonium based, all right, and phosphorus based, which is the phosphorus bombs, all right, the napalm that was dropped in Vietnam, all that's the same chemicals that are used in agriculture starting in 1945. And as the cycle of agrochemical development grew, as it became more and more um, a part of the agricultural landscape in Europe and Americas, then it I would say devolved, not involved, devolved into the GMO, okay, attack against life through agriculture initially. And of course, GMO simply means genetically modified organisms. But and we have the companies that you now see as Monsanto and other Syngenta and other companies that are involved in this process. But we find that the genetically modified organisms, right, that they refer to GMO, of course, it goes contrary to the what we call the relative law that was written in the Hebrew scriptures in the book of Deuteronomy. In the book of Deuteronomy, the 23rd chapter, it says then that thou shalt not uh, plant thy field with diverse seeds. Okay, and the understanding that is that your crop will become defiled. All right. Well,
cross fertilization.
Right. It was talking about cross fertilization at the time. All right. There was no consciousness about manipulating genes. Okay. But the eternal idea to extract is that there are natural boundaries between species that must be maintained in order to prevent the defilement of that species, which means that it would actually change the whole characteristic of that plant, okay, as opposed to the original genetic understanding or function that it would have as it relates to the Adamic body, because every plant has a signature, and that signature resonates with a part of the body. So if you interrupt or you disrupt the signature of the plant either through hybridization, cross-fertilization, GMO, then you're disrupting that particular plant's ability to function as it was designed and calibrated as we consume it. And because you disrupt that calibration, then the function that it has in the Adamic body is not fulfilled. So when we see GMO, we're talking about now a greater intrusion into the genetic makeup of life, right? Which calls for greater alarms because now you're displacing genes or replacing genes, and the calibration of that particular plant or that animal or the human being, all right, is terribly disrupted. And you no longer have what is a tomato from the Genesis creative process. You have something that's totally been adulterated, and therefore the impact that it would have in the Adamic body, right, would be detrimental, right? Especially the long term, because no one has understood what would be the long term impact, right, on replacing genes, all right, or transplacing genes in the genetic structure of plants, animals, and people. So,
what does it say, Nasi? That because these evil geniuses, again, they're not completely oblivious to the things that you're saying and that connection and that dynamic. What does it say about them that they continue on this path and have actually deceptively tried to, again, market and push it as something good, knowing that there's this underlying, negative consequences that are, on the horizon?
well,
What does it say about that?
it says that they're evil geniuses, and it can the only conclusion I can draw is that their objective is to destroy the planet, destroy all life on the planet. Because if you pollute the same water that you have to drink, the water their children have to drink, there's no consideration of life. So it's all profit over life, and consequently, to continue on this path, right? The ultimate end of the path is total destruction of all life on the planet, whether it be insect, animal, people, okay, and the environment that supports that. So going back to GMO and Monsanto, we find out there's an attack on the structural basis of life. And when we look at those companies that have so-called engineered genetically modified organisms in agriculture, they're not genetically modifying the plant to increase its yield. It's not even about increasing yield, right? It's increasing the plant's ability to be able to be protected against the chemicals that are used to grow the plant. Okay. All right. Otherwise, they become immune to the glyphosate herbicides, right, and other things that are used in agrochemical farming to grow the plant. So there's no record, there's no scientific proof that supports that genetically modified crops yield more. All right, and there is on record that there is a loss of yield, right, in genetically modified crops. There is on record there's an increase, right, of pesticide use in genetically modified crops, even though they advertise that you reduce the use of herbicides, right, on the crops, but actually you are actually increasing the use. All right, and it's documented. The one thing about, because the word now is glyphosate, some say glyphosate, all right, which is the number one weed killer or herbicide on the planet, and we know there's been a lot of lawsuits that have come out about the use of this. It's used in gardens, around the homes, schools, everywhere on it. The whole planet's been saturated with this one chemical herbicide. It's interesting to note that when this formula for glyphosate was first discovered back in the 50s, it was actually used as a chemical to clean what are called steel pipes and water containers, right? Because in your water pipes there's a buildup inside, all right, of corrosion elements, right, which is really metals, right, and boiler systems, right. So this particular substance, right, was actually used to clean these pipes, right, and the reason why I was able to clean the pipes because it was able to chelate, meaning to remove or take out, and then put into solution that they could dump, and then the pipes would be clean and everything. So when they took the solution from the boilers and they dumped it on the fields, right, they noticed that it killed plants. So, in noticing that it killed plants, then the evil genius would say, okay, well, maybe we can use that to control weeds. And that's how it became an herbicide, right? At the same time, it was also patented as an antibiotic. The same glyphosate was patented as because they found out that it not only kills plants, but the way it kills the plant is that it destroys what is called the Shikimite system, which is a microbiological system. It interrupts the bacteria in that system that is responsible for converting nutrients in the plant. So the plant actually starves to death, okay, because it can't uptake the nutrients because the glyphosate has stolen it or chelated it, all right. So they said, well, this is a good antibiotic because it can kill bacteria, all right. So, but it's a broad spectrum bacteria, means it can kill good and bad bacteria. Okay. So not only was a pipe cleaner, it's a herbicide and it's an antibiotic. But the danger of this particular glyphosate is that because they say, well, it's not a danger to human beings, right? Because it can only interrupt the calibration of bacteria that we aim. But the same bacteria that they aim for, right, in the soil or in the plant, it's the same bacteria that occupies our gut. All right. So when we consume glyphosate that's saturated in the plants or in the soil, right, the same reaction, right, it starts to chelate minerals, magnesium, manganese, right. Those things are in our body, and we become biologically attacked. Okay. And the food becomes deficit. And the last point about this extremely dangerous chemical is that the structural form of glyphosate, right, is the same structural form of glycine, which is a major protein or amino acid in our body. And glycine is responsible for building the protein that is responsible for collagen, joints, lung tissue, brain tissue, right? Connective tissue. Right, connective tissues, right? So what glyphosate does, because it mimics glycine, because the body looks at it and says, oh, that's glycine. And what it does over a period of time, it replaces the function of glycine, and it builds connective tissues that are inferior. All right, and what happens is that these connective tissues that bind cells together into organs, right? They become weak, right, and they open up and they allow other things to enter in, and this is the cause of many of the degenerative diseases we see today, particularly the rise of autism.
So when you talk about that degenerative process, and of course we are in degenerative process, we want to regenerate. When we worked in Ghana with the preventive health, with the Ministry of Health there and our preventive health team that went in, we called it regenerative health and nutrition. And we were dealing with the nutrition side, the dietetic side of the equation. What we didn't have was the agricultural, that relationship with the soil. We may have spoken about it from time to time, but that was not a component of the actual holistic approach. You now have been involved in Ghana with that, and what are the projects in the restoration village? And I know it's one of the stepping stones towards that idea to get on the land, literally be on the land, and to establish that divine agricultural component. What have you been involved with in that?
It's a good question. There's no health without agriculture. Agriculture, the health of the people actually begins in the soil. And that really takes us back to Genesis 1 and 29. Okay, when we talk about plants and what we call the preferred or the calibrated livet as opposed to diet, livet for the Adamic species. And it's important to go back and review, right, Genesis 1 and 29, the book of Genesis, the first chapter, the 29th verse, where it states that Yah says, I've given you every herb, right, of the field, right, and every tree that bears fruit that have seed in it, right, that grows after its kind. And we see there that that's referencing a plant-based livet. And I'm actually saying livet as opposed to diet. Okay, a plant-based livet.
The first instructions found in the biblical text,
right,
pertaining to our consumption of food.
Right, the nutritional profile for the Adamic species, right, was to maintain a specific plant-based livet. All right, and that was based on the herbs of the field. Okay, that's the language of the Bible, the herbs of the field. That's very hasadeh, which meant all of the edible plant vegetation that is available for Adamic consumption. And today there's over 70,000 species of plants, right, that the Adamic species can consume. And when you look at the standard American diet, you're only talking about 15 to 20 vegetables, right, that are on that plate, but not at the same time. Okay. But when you're talking about 70,000 known species, and there's still species of plants that are being revealed that are edible for food and medicine. So when Yahweh, right, he laid out, right, the profile, the livet profile for the Adamic species was a plant-based livet. And because plants are calibrated to sustain the biological and physiological function of the Adamic body, right, the regenerative power of the cells and tissues and organs can only be perpetual based on a plant-based livet, because plants are the intercessors or intermediaries between the minerals in the soil, right, and the minerals that must go into our Adamic bodies. All right, the plants take up those minerals in the soil, they transmute them, they add an intrinsic value to them, and then when we consume them, we are consuming whole foods, right, from the soil through plants. So when the cycle is broken, right, then aberrations occur, and that's when you have incidents of diseases that go into other aberrations of the Adamic soul, which is the tissues, organs of the Adamic body.
And so it's as simple as saying that this is the fuel that has been mandated, just like you buy a new car and it says this is the grade of gas or diesel versus petrol. This is what you should put in the vehicle, and you know there are consequences if you don't utilize that. How then do you explain, because this is how many people will say, well, Moses said we could eat this, we could eat that, whatever, and it's certainly not a plant-based diet when he's giving those instructions. How do we reconcile that apparent contradiction?
Right, it appears to be a contradiction, but we have to look at the historical the history of how that occurred, how it developed into that. And we'll just start with the 450-year uh, a period of enslavement of the Israelite nation in Egypt at the time. Of course, going through 400 plus years of bondage, right? That means that our people at that time went through a period of deculturalization, right? Desocialization. So everything of the Hebraic epistemology worldview was stripped, all right? The clothes that we wore, right? The way that we thought, the food that we ate,
right?
Okay, everything was ultimately changed. And so, under that period of bondage, right, we became, our minds became Egyptianized. All right, we became Egyptians. Our worldview was Egyptian. So, with the great deliverer that came at that period of history and delivered the children of Israel out of bondage, we know the story biblically, and brought us into the land, right? What Moses understood, because he understood the eternal idea that Yah was relaying, right, in the relative laws that govern our life. It wasn't that he did not understand Genesis 1 and 29, right? You have to understand, it's Moses, right? The great deliverer, right? Second hand of Pharaoh. I mean, it wasn't like he was stupid. He was a scholar,
right?
All right, a renowned scholar. So he understood, right, the writings of the prophets, and the relative laws that Yah had given to the Adamic species to maintain them, right, in the realm of regeneration, perpetual regeneration. So, but he also understood that our people had to be re-socialized. Had to be a process of reculturalizing our people. So, in understanding that, he knew that there had to be a transition of our people, right, from one state of consciousness to another, in particular as it relates to food consumption. So it wasn't that he could bring a people out of bondage, right, and then automatically overnight he would make them, introduce them to being vegans, right? There had to be a process. So understanding the process, he said, well, he created what is called a transition livet, right, where he identified that these are the clean and unclean meats, all right? You can eat this meat, but don't eat that meat. These are the clean and unclean fish. You can eat this fish, but not that. Eat that fish, because he understood, right, that the different types of animals, right, their profile from what they ate from impacted upon the flesh that the people would eat. So he knew that we could not eat the scavengers, all right, because there was going to be a biological impact negative on the body. So he understood the science of it, is what I'm trying to say. So the book of Leviticus, when it relates to clean and unclean meats, is simply Moses' understanding of transitioning a people, right, from a meat-based diet into eventually a vegan plant-based diet, which is the original livet for the Adamic species in Genesis 1.
So he was coming to bring dietary consciousness.
Absolutely.
And if we were to look at where the Hebrews and where humanity went henceforth, we would have to say that he failed, or that at least the people did not adhere to his instructions.
Right. I don't say, I feel that he performed, right. He gave the mandate, right. He taught, he gave the lessons, he gave the understanding, right, of the transition. But of course, the history bears out that we continue to degenerate into a state of consciousness that took us further and further away from the Rana Niski, the eternal idea of life and living, right, which is pre-fall Adamic species. And we continue to degenerate until we ended up into another captivity in modern day North America, which is the last great captivity. So it goes to the question about the present understanding of where we are as a people and where we have to go in terms of our community, the kingdom of Yah. And we find the word now restoration. All right, the restoration village, the eternal idea. What does restoration mean? So when the Father gave us the vision of the restoration village, and we look at the word again, understanding language, all right, we're talking about restoring, bringing something back to its original condition or value, right? To restore value to something, or to restore a condition or a state of being to something that was lost or damaged, okay, or misplaced or displaced. So when we look at the eternal idea of a restoration village, right, we're looking at it in two aspects. We're looking at it as an actual village,
Right.
a village,
Mm-hmm.
right, restoring the value of life through appropriate divine agricultural practices,
Mm-hmm.
right, restoring the value of family structure back to the villages,
Mm-hmm.
right,
Social order.
social order,
Mm-hmm.
morality,
Mm-hmm.
ethics, all that's part of the idea of restoration village.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but the restoration village, also the planet, is restoring the global village
Right.
back to moral ethical principles and restoring the idea of agrarian based lifestyle. Okay, the word agriculture is a complex word. All right, it's agri, the prefix, and culture.
Mm-hmm.
So you have agriculture, but when we hear the word agriculture, the thing that comes to us is food production.
Right.
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 But when we look at the prefix agri, it actually comes from a Latin root, ager, ager, right, which translates into agrarian. Okay, so the true essence of agriculture is agrarian culture. It's a culture that's based on the land and the people's relationship to the land,
right.
as stewards of it, right, and what the land in return can give to the people. So we find on this backdrop it says that love the land and the land will love you in return.
Mm-hmm.
That there's a reciprocal relationship between Adam and Adamah, between man and the land. When we say Adam, we're talking about Adamic species, both male and female, created he, them, and called their name Adam. All right, so when we look at the relationship between Adam and Adamah, right, it's critical that we understand that this relationship is something that will guarantee our existence on the planet perpetually. Mm-hmm. So the eternal idea of restoration is restoring the Genesis creative idea back to the minds of our people so that we can restore the planet back to its original condition, right? Unpolluted, undefiled, water, air, etc., the elements, and returning the minds of the people back to an understanding of a land connection as stewards of the earth. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to go back to horse and carriage, you know. It means that any technology that is developed, right, on the planet has to be a technology that's in harmony, right, with the creations and the relative laws that govern the creation. So any technology or innovation, right, that disrupts, all right, or destroys the creation cannot be, it's forbidden. So there are green technologies, all right. There are technologies that will be invented and have been invented, right, that will sustain the environment, but at the same time create a greater understanding of how to live in accordance with nature, as we will call it. So it's not that we won't be without ideas or inventions. There's going to be many inventions, right, that will come forth out of the minds of a people that have an agrarian-based understanding that whatever we create, whatever the inventions are, right, they have to not only sustain but enhance the environment that we live in.
I think when you talk about this restoration of this idea, and I almost see it as it's part of our charge that ties into after getting here, after returning here to the land, to obviously our identity coming into the truth. It led us here, but once we got here, the mission changed because the question literally for us was now what. And the now what was our mission and mandate prophetically to be that light unto the nations. Mm-hmm. And so as you engage the brothers and sisters in the other Edenic lands, because that's our focus, it's not in the lands of the captivity as we not so fondly refer to, where we were born and raised in the Americas. But our mission now is to raise up and to return and restore that idea using this as a model, of what we've been able to accomplish, the principles that we've returned to. Mm-hmm. In my own experience with, again, the regenerative health and nutrition and other engagements in the Edenic lands, it's not something it's not new to them. It's nothing that we're bringing that is foreign to them. It actually resonates with an innate sense of historical connection, and they may have to go back a couple generations to what their grandmothers and grandfathers were teaching and telling them and what they witnessed. And then it's almost like in the Greek Testament where it talks about the Holy Comforter, would come and bring all things back to their remembrance. And so that's how I like to look at it. So I'm sure it's a two-way street, because learning is eternal, as Nasik Shalik always taught us. But in your engaging with the people, I've seen the photographs of you with the young sons and the daughters, in the gardens in Sogakope, and the other projects that you're engaged in. Speak to us about that dynamic, and then also Kenya. And you've been in the islands, and I think it was it Jamaica?
Jamaica, Antigua.
Right. Again, the most sought after mind and expert in this arena of divine organic agricultural or bio. You're always bringing us new terminology.
Right. Yeah. Excellent question. I think I would like to use the backdrop of the COVID pandemic.
That brings us all the way up to the present.
Because historically, prophetically, we've been taught that there are conditions, social cultural conditions on the planet that elicit a particular response from the people, from the populace, and we find today that due to the quote COVID-19 pandemic, we see that it has literally brought the world to a halt.
Right.
In bringing the world to a halt, right, it has actually stopped, in some instances, the attack against the planet. All right.
Right.
We see that because industries are being shut down and pollution levels are dropping. Some areas, animals are coming back to particular areas that they had fled from. In a short time, we're talking about a short time, months. We see this happening, and it kind of takes me back to this picture that came out, talked about the great climatic change that came. It was the great superstorm that came across the North American continent, or the Northern Hemisphere, actually, because the Southern Hemisphere was preserved, right? But at the end of the picture, because there was this great devastation, the storm froze everything on the Northern Hemisphere. Everything came to a halt. People had to migrate down to the south, with Mexico and other countries in the south. The whole nations, right? But at the end of the picture, right, something stuck to my mind, and it was two astronauts actually in space. At the end of the picture, right, two astronauts were actually in space, circling the Earth, right? And when they looked down, right, out of their capsule, and they looked down into the Earth, one of them says, "Wow, this is amazing," right? And it showed the picture, and it says, "Yeah, the Earth is pristine, it's clean." Right? So what had happened was that this phenomena of this superstorm that was a result of the intrusion into the cycles that govern nature, right, through technology and abuse of knowledge. And this storm that swept the Northern Hemisphere was actually an event to purify, rectify, and restore the environment back to its original station again, or condition. So what we see happening historically, prophetically, as the prophetic events unfold, that there's a phenomenon that's happening that is a cleansing mechanism, all right? The whole climate change, what we refer to as climate chaos, which is actually a mechanism by which the earth is being cleansed. All right, as our bodies become defiled, or we eat something that's not right, the body heats up, it burns, right? Or you get diarrhea, you run off, So there's a relative response in the earth, right?
An intelligent,
conscious response of the earth relative to the abuse, right, of technology and the abuse of life or death styles that has been plaguing the earth since the dominion of this particular cultural society. So we see today, right, as the earth has come to a halt, things have come to a halt, we begin to see this reverting of nature, right? But the point I'm trying to bring is that in that, we also see that people are now, because of the COVID-19 and the attachment of, you have to have a strong immune system now to ward off, right?
Yeah.
Which is the basis of Genesis 1:29, because if you have the right live right, you're sustaining the immune system, and you're giving it what it needs, because it's calibrated to eat the vegan, plant-based living, divine organically grown, all right? So now we see that people looking for safe food, right? Food that can boost the immune system, and we're looking for safe water, right? We're looking for safe everything now.
Right.
So what we having in the idea of the restoration village, now we're restoring, right, the eternal idea of divine organic agriculture back to our people in the endemic lands. So presently, the restoration village, which the agroforestry portion of the restoration village, agroforestry simply means a model of agriculture where you can combine trees and the growing of vegetables into land acreage.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, when we say trees, we're talking about both medicinal and trees that produce food.
Mm-hmm.
And in between the rows of trees, you're cultivating vegetables and other herbs for consumption. So you get 2 to 3 times your yield per acre of land.
Mm-hmm.
So with the agroforestry model, right, it's utilized, it started in 2019 as a model to empower, right, uh, in the rural area where we are actually located, to empower women, children, as well as men to the understanding of the restoration of the restoration of agriculture in the rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
So the agroforestry model, right, deals a lot with women because women are the backbone of agriculture throughout the endemic lands,
Mm-hmm.
right? 80 to 85% of the farmers are women.
Women.
All right. So women are the source of agricultural production throughout the endemic lands.
So they're not just sitting at the market.
They're not
market
just at
women,
the market.
They're actually
they're actually
at
in
the
the
other end of
field,
that.
right? Cultivating,
Yeah.
weeding, harvesting, packaging. You know. So the idea of the restoration agroforestry model, right, is to wed, right, rural agrarian technology, right, with technology that is in harmony, right, with the natural cycles of the creation, and in that we have a divine organic approach that enhances both concepts: the agrarian from the rural agrarian science and from what divine organic agriculture can bring, to wed those two techniques together to create a technology, right, that can create the yield, all right, in terms of kilos or weight, and a yield in terms of nutritional value.
Safe, yeah.
So it's important for us to understand the role that women and children or youth play, right, in the restoration village concept, at the practical side of it. So this is what we actually are doing, is training women and youth in how to cultivate the fields according to the idea. At the same time, that's in the rural area that where the restoration village land is situated, but also in Sogokope, which is the what we call our base for operating, which is a city, which is about an hour and a half drive from the village area restoration. We also have a program.
So Sogokope is what? How far from Accra?
Okay, Sogokope, good question. Sogokope sits on the main artery or the main highway that runs from Accra, which is the southern part of Ghana on the ocean side, all the way up to the northern part of Aflao, which is the border, Togo-Ghana border. Sogokope is the city that sits right in the middle of that highway in terms of the distance. So from Sogokope to Accra is about 2.5 hour drive, long if you get caught in traffic.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's our base of operation because from Sogokope to the Restoration Village Farm, right, through the rural back roads and the laterite roads, it takes about an hour and a half. All right, during the dry season. Rainy season is a little more difficult, as you know.
Perhaps even impassable at times.
At times, yes.
Yeah.
So Sogokope is the base of operation. And there, because it's a semi-rural city, we have been given the blessing to engage our neighbors and engage in our neighbors. There was one sister, Sasoni, who saw the need for engaging the youth to teach them remedial skills in reading, writing, and arithmetic, because with the COVID-19 shutdown, none of the children are in school now, and saw the need for them to be actively involved in something that would be positive in terms of the time that they're out of school. So she took it upon herself to bring them to her porch right, and begin to teach them these lessons on a daily basis.
So Sonia, being one of the sisters who came into the truth
Right.
in terms of identity, came here to visit last year, I believe, the end of
Right.
last year,
Correct.
and then went to visit what we were doing in Ghana, and was so moved and taken that she actually decided to relocate there.
Correct. This is
Yeah.
correct. So from there, Akiwak, all right,
Mhm.
who's also relocated to West Edding,
Mhm.
who works hand in hand with me with the agricultural portion. We saw the enthusiasm of the children, right? And they totally engulfing the fact that they were being taught and given these remedial skills.
Mhm.
And because they're from a rural area, semi-rural area, it only was logical for us to say, well, maybe they might want to learn how to grow food without chemicals because they come from farming families.
Mhm.
And so they became involved with the what we call the Junior Agri Eco Engineers Market Garden Project.
All right.
Okay, so it's we started off with 6 children, all right, from the age of 6, 7 years to 14 years. Now it's up to 15 children, right, from the age of 3 years to 18 years. And we've created 2 market gardens. We call them market gardens because they're not just home gardens,
Mhm.
but we actually were able to get a vacant lot
Mhm.
next to one of the houses that we live in that was just full of wild herbs that they call weeds,
Mhm.
right? And we were blessed with the opportunity to take that and convert it into a large market garden. And the children came and they received their OJT on the job training, and we gave them the plan. All right, they built the raised beds and they put the cement blocks around the bed. They did geometric circles and different designs, and they planted and grew the food. And it became an integral part of the Restoration Village Agroforestry Project because it also gives volume to the food that we're producing, right, to the organic market. So they become a very instrumental part of not just learning how to grow the food, but now they're getting the remedial skills in reading, writing, arithmetic every morning.
Mhm.
Then they go to the market gardens. They get the OJT training there. Then when the garden crops are ready, they harvest, they package, right, and they
seen that.
marketeers,
Yeah.
right. So from the seed to the market, they're involved, and they learn it. All right,
Right.
and these are the youth, both male and female youth.
Right.
All right. So
This by the way, Nasik, this is an intervention in terms of the dynamic of the problem that you have on the continent globe or across the continent wide, that the youth in the rural areas want to go to the urban areas,
right,
because that's what's pulling on them. That
right,
it's about getting a job
correct,
and putting in the mind that the land is the source of our, not just our being and our strength, but also is the source of all wealth, as is often said. But it's putting it in a very tangible way that hey, you can, you don't have to go and look for a job. Someone, if you're growing food, people will look for you with money in hand.
Correct.
And so it helps to, I'm sure the parents and the townspeople appreciate this intervention, which is keeping and creating roots for that next generation to remain there and keep the place viable.
That's the idea. That's actually the practical implementation of it because we have um, very good response from the community, our neighbors, right? Who once saw a lot full of weeds or wild herbs, right? And now see a vibrant lot of food and children that are actually growing the food. And we have the community outreach program where we actually donate some of the food to our neighbors, all right, to the elders, different people in the community. We actually have our marketeers, right, who are now the agri ambassadors to go and take these bundles and as free will offerings to our neighbors in Sokokope. And now the program or the project is now being looked upon as something that could be funded, right, to reach other communities in Sokokope and also use as a model to go into other regions in Ghana because we're in the Volta region right now. So that's proposal has been written for that and is being reviewed now presently. But the whole idea of empowering women and youth, right, is more than just growing the food and marketing it because we said as engineers we also giving those youth, identifying those youth that actually want to go into other areas of agriculture in terms of being agronomists. That's the economical side of it. Being project designers, okay, because we have a couple of youth that are very skillful in terms of artistically, right, and mathematically, and that's a basis for being an engineer. So we want to develop into project design engineers, okay, where they actually can design farm projects from A to Z, all at the top, right, including irrigation, the whole gamut, right. And also we have the nutritional side of agriculture, right. Those that want to go and become, all love, right, become agri nutritionists, right. Knowing what's in the food, how to prepare the food, what to eat to empower against a disease, what to eat to in convalescence from disease, what prevents it. So all this is part and parcel of the whole idea of restoration, the village, as far as the agrarian approach to it. Yeah. And it's something that is very inspirational to us that are there. And just the other day, we had another group of children that come in flooding, want to be a part of the project. Now we got 2 and 3-year-olds that are hanging around, want to be engaged in it. So we see the vision of Abba Benami, right, actually manifesting in the Edenic lands, and it will continue to grow and flourish.
That's again a testimony to his vision. The idea of the Restoration Village is one that was dear to him and is dear to us. We call this the Village of Peace. I don't think we were the ones who labeled it that, but it caught on. And indeed, we've come to understand that a village is not an architectural construct, but a social construct. And so wherever you are on the planet, you can model and pattern yourself after that success in that social arena and achieve the same results that we have here, which is another whole segment that we could talk about. But again, COVID-19 and where we're headed from here, what do you see? We're looking at 2019, 2020. 2019, of course, marked the end of the 400 years in the captivity, in this most recent captivity of the Hebrew, those of Hebrew ancestry. And COVID jumped off at the beginning of 2020. Where are we going from here? What do we see? And what's your prognosis, for as we move forward into this next round?
I have to say the prognosis has to be historically, prophetically based, because this is our epistemology, this is our worldview as Hebrews. So we ultimately know how will be played out, but we know that there are different chapters in it. So as we can continue to see the catastrophic events that are happening, not just with COVID-19, right. That's one aspect of it, but we also see on the west coast of the lands of the captivity, they're being engulfed in fire. On the east coast is going to be snow and floods, and right. And the southern part is the floods, and we just see this whole climate chaos that is happening, which is again a result of the intrusion and disruption and disregard of the eternal laws that govern holy creations, as it was in the Genesis creative process. So as we see this thing being played out, wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes in various places, we understand that this is the prophetic unfolding of those events. Right. And so we have to have a relative response. What is our behavior to what is happening? And that is, we have to understand that we have to continue to create and build institutions, right, that will be the response, the relative response, right, not just for our survival, but for our thrival in the generations to come. So the Restoration Village is not, as you say, a idea where you growing food. Is a social construct, and so our continued efforts, right, and energy to go into building and developing and expanding this idea, right, is our relative response to the prophetic unfoldment of these events. And in that, we see that on the ground where I'm at in Ghana, right, that the people are responding. Our people, with children, adults, they're responding to the activities, right? They understand what is happening. They see uh, what is a very negative impact on their lives, but at the same time, they see something that is happening in the positive light in terms of women and children being empowered. Mm-hmm. And that is causing them to gravitate right to the light. That's the light. The light is actually the practical application of what we're supposed to be doing in these times. Mm-hmm. And when they see the practical application or the substance, they can see it, they can eat it, they can taste it, they can feel it. Then they're drawn to it, right, as the way forward. And this is what is happening down on the ground. The same thing is happening in Kenya because it's where we're at in Kenya. Right. The same phenomenon is happening in South Eden where we're at in right. South Eden. So we must.
Calls are going forth from Zambia.
Right. And now we're talking about Zambia. Right. So now understanding that there has to be an appropriate response from the sons and daughters of Yah as these events unfold, then we have to stay aligned with our purpose.
You spoke of building institutions and the institutional response to this demand and to this global cataclysm. It was one of the prophets, I can't think initially who it was, but one of the prophets spoke of how that the whole earth was off its foundations, mm-hmm. and the word foundations is actually in Hebrew institutions. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we've had this discussion. We were blessed to have this discussion with one of the institutions. You know, Prince Yadiel is an institution in the Hebraic community. Any last words, any last messages to those as we wrap up this part two? We could go on and this particular, we were talking earlier about how this subject itself has so many different branches and roots that take us everywhere, because it is holistic, it is all encompassing, that everything matters where our lives are concerned. But any last words for the audience in this particular segment?
Toda, thank you. I would first of all say that our way of life, right? The language that we use, right? It's not indicative of a religion. Right? Mm-hmm. We're talking about a lifestyle, a way of life. Mm-hmm. Okay, a spirituality that's plays out in our behavior in terms of how we live. Mm-hmm. All right, and that is biblically based. When I say biblically based, we're talking about the writings of the prophets of old.
Hebrew prophets.
Okay, and so when we look at those writings of the ancients, we simply understand that they are simply the relative laws given by Yah, right, to govern the sustainability of the environment and to sustain our lives in the environment in which we were placed. Mm-hmm. And as long as we stay aligned with those relative laws, right, those calibrations of the earth, the calibrations of the Adamic body, the Adamic species, that we will ensure that we would live perpetually, that the environment would always be a sustainable environment, right? It wouldn't become mushkat, corrupted, mm-hmm. all right? And therefore it gain from generation to generation, right, the everlasting value of life, all right, even into physical immortality as a biological, spiritual reality. Mm. So I would venture to say that we who understand, the sons and daughters of Yah, who have been enlightened, right, with the historical and prophetic understanding of where we at, because as Hebrews, mm-hmm. all right, our epistemology, our worldview has to be, if it's not speaking to the laws and the prophets, there is no what?
No light.
No light.
Mm-hmm.
So
no intelligence.
There's no intelligence.
No wisdom.
There's no wisdom. There's no way forward.
Mm-hmm.
So we already have to meet the framework of the way forward. It's only for us to be, is to stay aligned with those relative laws, with the understanding of the way forward, and implement it in our lifestyle, and implement it in our institutions, implement it in our projects and programs across the endemic lands. And that's the restoration, all right? Our implementation, right, of our alignment with the relative laws and understandings that were given to us through the prophets by way of the Yah mind, the Yah consciousness, that will create, right, the restoration of the global village, Gan Eden, and the endemic people, the endemic Adamic species on Earth.
Wow. physical immortality as an attainable objective. That's our part 3.
Okay.
Well, hallelujah. Again, we want to thank His Excellency Prince Yadiel Ben Israel, fondly known as the Prince of Divine Organic Agriculture. We want to thank him for his presence, taking time, because he will be moving again soon. Angels ascending and descending, moving from lands to land. Fortunately, in this era, we're glad that it's on this side of the pond, as it's known. I want to thank you again, Nasik, for this opportunity, and we hope that the audience can get as much as I'm sure it's piqued your interest, and you've got lots of questions. You can forward them to us. Voices of Truth will be an ongoing series. Nasik, where can anyone reach you or inquire about the project and give support?
I can be reached at my email, princeofagriculture@gmail.com, and of course, any contact can be referred to you, can be forwarded to me, and I can appropriately respond.
Okay, princeofagriculture@gmail.com. So, hallelujah.
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 Nasik?
Yahweh.
Yahweh. Torah. Hallelujah.